Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
November rain drummed against the windows of Hogwarts, creating a melancholy symphony that accompanied the late evening. In Gryffindor Tower, 4 fifth-year students sat around the fireplace, though none of them paid attention to the cozy crackling of logs. James Potter nervously twirled his wand in his hands, his glasses reflecting the dancing flames, and his unruly hair looked even more chaotic than usual. "I'm telling you, something's happening down there," he muttered, lowering his voice to a whisper, though the common room was nearly empty. "Filch has passed by the dungeons 3 times this hour already, and when I tried to get closer, he looked at me as if I were planning to blow up the entire castle." Sirius Black, sprawled in his chair with his characteristic elegant carelessness, raised an eyebrow. His long black hair fell across his face, hiding gray eyes that sparkled with mischief. "Filch always looks at you like that, James. Especially after that business with the fireworks in the Charms corridor." "That was 2 weeks ago," James replied indignantly. "And that's not the point. Filch is behaving strangely even by his own standards. He's guarding something." Remus Lupin looked up from his book, Ancient Runes and Their Influence on Architecture, which he had been reading by firelight. His face, always somewhat pale, seemed particularly weary. A week remained until the full moon, but the cycle's influence was already taking its toll. "Perhaps it's connected to the reconstruction? Today I saw workers carrying some strange tools to the dungeons. Not like ordinary building tools, more like the ones archaeologists use." Peter Pettigrew, the smallest of the 4, nervously gnawed his fingernail. His small eyes darted from one friend to another, as if trying to gauge the group's mood before voicing his own opinion. Maybe we shouldn't be curious? I heard Professor McGonagall talking to Dumbledore about some unforeseen complications in the dungeons. She seemed worried." Sirius snorted. "Peter, you always worry. If we listened to every warning, we'd never have discovered the secret passages to Hogsmeade, never learned to become animagi, and certainly never created our map of secret routes." He rose from his chair with the grace inherent to his pure-blooded upbringing, despite all his rebellious nature. "James, what exactly did you see?" James perked up, sensing support from his best friend. He jumped to his feet, beginning to pace before the fireplace, a habit that betrayed his excitement. "Today, after defense against the dark arts, I was going to the library through the corridor by the dungeons. Suddenly I heard this rumbling, like something huge and heavy falling. The dungeons shook, and strange blue smoke began seeping from under the floor." "Blue smoke?" Remus set aside his book, his attention fully captured. "That's interesting. Ancient sources mention that such smoke might indicate the awakening of old protective charms or the destruction of magical seals." Peter fidgeted nervously again. "Seals? What seals?" "Well, hypothetically," Remus took on his characteristic lecturer role, "the founders might have left hidden chambers or treasuries in the castle, protected by powerful charms. Over centuries, these charms might weaken or, conversely, be activated by external influence." Sirius clicked his tongue, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "And you're saying the workers might have accidentally uncovered something?" "It's just a theory," Remus hastened to caution, though his tone suggested he believed in this theory himself. James stopped and turned to his friends, his face glowing with determination. "Then I propose we test this theory in practice. Tonight." "James," Peter began, but Sirius interrupted him. "Excellent idea. I'm dying of boredom after all these transfiguration essays. Besides, if there's really something interesting there, better we find it first than some Slytherins." Remus sighed but nodded. "Very well, but we go prepared. We'll take everything necessary, extra lights, antidotes, our notes. And the invisibility cloak," James added with a sly smile. "Though it won't cover all of us, it'll help if needed." Peter, seeing that the decision was already made, reluctantly nodded. He knew it was better to go with his friends than remain alone with his fears. At midnight, the 4 Marauders crept from Gryffindor Tower, using all their knowledge of secret passages and patrol schedules accumulated over 5 years of study at Hogwarts. Over this time, they had learned Filch and Mrs. Norris's schedules, knew where the ghosts usually spent their nights, and could predict the routes of nighttime rounds. The dungeon corridors greeted them with cold and dampness, as well as a strange, barely audible humming that seemed to come from underground. James led his friends along familiar routes, but when they approached the place where he had seen the blue smoke, it became obvious that something had fundamentally changed. "Merlin's beard," Sirius whispered, stopping dead in his tracks. Where once there had been an ordinary stone wall, now gaped an enormous opening. The edges of the passage were perfectly smooth, as if someone had carefully cut away part of the wall with magic rather than destroyed it with brute force. From the depths of the tunnel seeped soft silvery light that pulsed in a rhythm resembling a heartbeat. Remus approached closer, drawing his wand. "Lumos," he whispered, and the light at his wand's tip mingled with the silvery glow from the tunnel. "This isn't natural lighting. The magic here is very old and very powerful." "What's this?" Peter pointed to the floor by the entrance. On the stone floor, carved runes spelled out a message in Latin. "Coaudet adipici, dignus est intrare." "Who dares to achieve is worthy to enter," Remus translated after brief consideration. A classic challenge formula. The founders loved such things. James took a step toward the entrance, but Sirius grabbed his sleeve. "Wait! Look!" They looked where Sirius pointed and saw another inscription, much smaller and almost hidden in shadow. "Quatuor ut unum, vel omnes vel nullus." "For as one, either all or none," Remus translated again, his voice sounding troubled. It's as if they knew we would come exactly four together." Peter stepped back. "Maybe it's a trap. Maybe someone knew we'd be here." James shook his head. "No, look at the runes. They're old, very old. This couldn't have been prepared specifically for us." He paused, studying the inscriptions. Unless the founders foresaw that someday four friends would find this entrance," Remus finished for him. "In their time, prophecies and divination were common. It's entirely possible they created this labyrinth for future generations of students." Sirius smiled, though his smile was tense. "Well, they weren't wrong about the number. There really are four of us, and we really are friends." The humming from the tunnel's depths intensified, and now they could distinguish something like distant voices or, perhaps, music. The soft light grew brighter, as if something in the depths was responding to their presence. "I say we go," James declared resolutely. "If this was really created by the founders, then it should be safe. They wouldn't have created deadly traps for their own students." "What about the Chamber of Secrets?" Peter asked uncertainly. "Salazar Slytherin created it with a basilisk that killed students." Remus nodded. "Peter has a point. But on the other hand, all four founders are mentioned here, not just Slytherin. Perhaps they created this together, before their conflict." Sirius was already standing on the threshold. "The only way to find out is to enter. By the way, don't you notice? The air here is warmer than in the corridor. And it smells strange. Not like dungeon mustiness, but something fresh." Indeed, from the tunnel came warmth and a barely perceptible aroma of wildflowers and fresh grass, a scent that was absolutely impossible in a November dungeon of an ancient castle. "Very well," James said, extending his hand toward the entrance. "Quatuor ut unum, four as one." As soon as his fingers touched the invisible barrier at the threshold, the light in the tunnel flared, and the runes on the floor glowed gold. Feeling some strange warmth pass through his body, James took the first step inside. Immediately, the space around them changed. The tunnel walls looked as if they had been carved from one enormous stone, yet were absolutely smooth to the touch. Along their entire length stretched carved images, scenes from Hogwarts life of past centuries. Here students in ancient robes studied spells long since forgotten. Their teachers in unfamiliar garments conducted ceremonies not mentioned in any historical book. "Look at this," Remus whispered, stopping before one of the images. On it, for figures, unmistakably the founders of Hogwarts, stood around some complex magical circle, their wands directed toward the center. They really did create this together. The air around them was filled with some special energy, not frightening, but extraordinarily powerful. Each step echoed with a barely audible chime, as if they were walking on the strings of a giant harp. The silvery light illuminating the tunnel seemed alive. It moved and danced, creating patterns on the walls. When the last of the Marauders, Peter, who walked slowest and most nervously, fully entered the tunnel, behind them closed a stone gate with a dull rumble. Not completely closed. A thin strip of light from the corridor still penetrated through a small gap, but it became clear that simple return was no longer possible. "Well, that's just wonderful," Peter muttered. "Now we're trapped." "Not trapped," But on an adventure, Sirius corrected him, though his voice sounded less confident than usual. The tunnel led downward in a gentle slope, and with each step the air became warmer and more fragrant. The images on the walls became more detailed and realistic. It seemed the figures were about to come alive and speak to them. James noticed that some of the carved characters were looking directly at them, following them with their eyes. "This is impossible," he whispered, stopping before one such image, a young wizard in Gryffindor robes who smiled at him and nodded. "Possible if the magic is powerful enough," Remus replied, his voice filled with awe. The founders were the strongest wizards of their time. They could create something bordering on the impossible. Soon they found themselves in a spacious circular hall. The ceiling was so high it was lost in shadows, despite the bright silvery light that had no visible source. In the center of the hall stood a stone pedestal on which lay an open book the size of a large folio. But most impressive in the hall were 4 archways positioned at the cardinal points. Each archway was unique. The eastern one glowed with red gold light and was adorned with images of lions and swords. The northern one emitted blue radiance with carved eagles and books. The western one shone with yellow light featuring badgers and wheat sheaves. The southern one was shrouded in greenish glow with carved serpents and daggers. "Houses," Remus breathed. 4 trials from the 4 founders. James approached the pedestal and began reading the open book. The text was written in the same Latin as the inscriptions by the entrance, but the handwriting constantly changed, as if 4 different people had taken turns writing on these pages. "It says here," he hesitated for a moment, translating the ancient Latin in his head. "Let each show the worthiness of his heart before the face of him whose path is closest to his own. Only by passing the trials of all 4 paths can you obtain what was hidden from the world since the time of the Great Schism." "The Great Schism," Sirius repeated. "They mean the conflict between the founders? The one that led to Salazar Slytherin leaving Hogwarts?" Remus nodded. "It seems so. And what was hidden? Apparently they hid something important before finally parting ways." Peter approached the western archway, Hufflepuff's archway, and carefully peered inside. "There's a corridor here, but I can't see where it leads. The darkness is so thick that even Lumos doesn't help." "Same here," Sirius confirmed from the southern Slytherin archway. James continued reading the book. "There's something else written here. Let the bravest lead the way, for the lion's path will open only to him who knows no fear in his heart." He looked up at the eastern archway. "I suppose we should start with Gryffindor." "Logical," Remus agreed. "We're all Gryffindors, so Godric Gryffindor's test should be closest to us." Sirius shrugged. "Or the most difficult. The founders might have thought that testing a student of one's own house should be more rigorous than testing others." James removed his glasses and wiped them, a habit that betrayed his nervousness. But when he put them back on, his gaze was determined. "Well then, I'll go first. If something goes wrong, you'll pull me out." "James," Peter began. "No," James shook his head. "This was my idea. I brought us here. Besides, the book is right. I'm the most impatient of us. If anyone should go first, it's me." He approached the eastern archway, and the red gold light became more intense, as if responding to his presence. When James extended his hand toward the radiance, it enveloped his fingers, and a voice echoed through the hall, deep, commanding, but not hostile. "James Potter, student of the House of Gryffindor, are you ready to prove your courage not with words, but with deeds? Are you ready to risk everything for those you love?" James felt his mouth go dry, but his voice rang out firmly. "I am ready." "Then enter, and let your heart show its true strength." The red gold light completely enveloped James, and he vanished into the archway. His friends rushed after him, but encountered an invisible wall. "James!" Sirius shouted, pounding his fists against the barrier. "James, can you hear us?" But there was no answer. Only the echo of their voices in the empty hall, and a distant sound coming from behind the archway. The sound of metal against metal, as if someone were fighting with swords. James found himself in a long corridor that resembled the connection between the dungeons and the main part of the castle, but everything here looked different. More ancient, more magnificent. The walls were covered with rich tapestries depicting knightly battles, and in niches stood armor from various eras, from simple chainmail to complex suits adorned with numerous magical runes. But strangest of all was that the corridor was not empty. Through it walked figures, semi-transparent like ghosts, but with clearer contours. These were students and teachers from long past centuries, going about their business. Young men in ancient robes discussing some spells, girls laughing at long-forgotten jokes, stern teachers carrying stacks of parchments. Echoes, James whispered, remembering defense against the dark arts lessons. Imprints of the past, preserved in a place of strong magic. He began moving forward, trying not to touch the semi-transparent figures, but one of them, a young man in Gryffindor robes who looked slightly older than James, suddenly turned to him. "Are you new?" the young man asked, his voice sounding as if it came from far away. "I don't recognize you. I'm Robert McGonagall, 6th year. And you?" James hesitated, not knowing whether to respond to an echo from the past, but decided to try. "James Potter, 5th year." "Potter?" Robert tilted his head. "Haven't heard that surname. What family are you from? Pure blood?" "Yes, pure blood," James replied. "Strange," Robert muttered, still frowning at him. "The Potters? I can't recall such a family among the Sacred 28. Must be some lesser branch." His tone was dismissive, as if James's lineage wasn't aristocratic enough for his tastes. James felt his blood boil, but restrained himself from a sharp reply. This young man was merely an echo, a reflection of times when pure blood status was considered more important than a person's character. He walked past Robert and continued down the corridor. Soon the echoes around him began to change, becoming older and older. Robes became simpler, hairstyles more archaic, and conversations increasingly formal. He saw students studying spells that had long fallen out of use, teachers instructing in arts not mentioned in modern textbooks. As he passed one group of echoes, teachers in very ancient clothing heatedly debating something in Latin, one of them suddenly stopped and looked directly at him. "You don't belong to this time," the teacher said, his voice clearer than the other echoes. "You're from the future." "Interesting, very interesting." The other echoes didn't notice this conversation, continuing their affairs as if nothing had happened. But that teacher still watched James with a penetrating gaze. "Don't stop, young man," he finally said. "Godric awaits. And remember, he sees not who you are, but who you might become." James nodded and walked on, feeling his heart beat faster. The corridor gradually became more magnificent, the ceiling rose higher, and the walls were adorned with increasingly rich ornaments. Finally, he reached enormous double doors with carved lions holding their paws on Gryffindor's coat of arms. When James touched the doors, they opened without the slightest effort, revealing a spacious hall resembling a throne room. At the end of the hall on a high throne sat a man of majestic stature with a long copper-red beard and blazing eyes. He was dressed in a red-gold robe adorned with exquisite embroidery, and beside the throne stood the famous sword of Godric Gryffindor, emanating its own soft radiance. "Come closer, young man." The man spoke in a voice like quiet thunder. "I am Godric Gryffindor, and you stand in my domain." James approached closer, feeling his heart beat faster. To see one of Hogwarts' founders, even if it was only an echo or some magical embodiment, was an incredible experience. The air in the hall seemed thicker, saturated with the power and wisdom of centuries. "James Potter," Gryffindor continued, rising from his throne. He was even taller than he had seemed sitting, a true giant with broad shoulders and hands accustomed to wielding a sword. "You have come here with your friends seeking what was hidden. But tell me, what is true courage?" James hesitated for a moment. This was not a simple question, but a test. He felt the founder penetrating with his gaze into the deepest corners of his soul, searching for something. True courage it's not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it when necessary to protect those you love. Gryffindor nodded, a barely perceptible hint of approval appearing on his stern face. "Well said, but words are merely words, young man. It's easy to speak of courage while sitting by a warm fireplace in a safe tower. Show me your courage indeed." He took the sword and held it out to James. "Take the weapon of your house." James took the sword, and it seemed surprisingly light and perfectly balanced. The blade gleamed in the light of magical torches illuminating the hall, and thin golden veins ran along the steel, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Now," Gryffindor said, his voice becoming sterner, "show whether you are worthy to bear the name of a Gryffindor." The hall around them began to change. The walls expanded, the ceiling rose even higher, and James found himself on a large circular arena surrounded by high stands. The stands filled with semi-transparent figures from the past, students and teachers from various eras, all watching him with expectation and curiosity. At the opposite end of the arena appeared something that made James grip the sword's hilt tighter. It was a knight in black armor, faceless and menacing. His armor absorbed light, creating a zone of absolute darkness around the figure. In his hands was also a sword, but this sword emanated a dark radiance that made James shudder with unpleasant cold. "This is your fear," Gryffindor's voice explained, coming from somewhere above. Now the founder sat in a place of honor in the stands, observing the trial. "Fear of failure, fear of not meeting expectations, fear of losing those you love. Fear that you're not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. Defeat it, and you will pass the trial." The dark night began approaching, and with each step James felt waves of anxiety and doubt wash over him. The air became heavy, like before a storm, and the stands around gradually fell silent. The knight delivered the first blow, and James barely managed to block it with his sword. The force of the strike sent him several steps back, and his hands went numb from the vibration. The dark blade left a thin black streak on Gryffindor's sword that slowly spread across the golden metal. "Fear poisons even the purest weapon," Gryffindor's voice commented. "Don't let it possess your heart." But easier said than done. Each strike from the Dark Knight brought new visions of horror. James saw Sirius falling from a height after a failed animagus transformation, his scream echoing in emptiness. He saw Remus losing control during the full moon and harming innocent people, his human eyes full of horror at realizing what he had done. He saw Peter crying in pain after cruel bullying by older students while he, James, stood aside, too cowardly to intervene. And most terrifying, he saw himself standing over their bodies, knowing he could have saved them if he had been a better friend, a better leader, a better person. If not for his pride, his impatience, his constant need to be the center of attention. James retreated, defending himself less and less confidently. Gryffindor's sword grew dim in his hands, covered with black spots of fear. The stands around the arena filled with whispers of condemnation. "Not brave enough, unworthy of Gryffindor, will lead his friends to their doom. Arrogant spawn." The Dark Knight struck blow after blow, and James felt his strength leaving him. His breathing became labored, and his legs buckled. A little more, and he would fall, and then— "No!" James shouted, stopping so suddenly that the Dark Knight almost struck him in the chest with his sword. The opponent's blade passed just centimeters from his face, but James didn't even blink. "I won't let fear control me." He remembered words Remus had once said to him during one of their long conversations by the fireplace. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, James. It's the choice to act rightly despite fear." And then James understood. He wasn't supposed to be unafraid. He was supposed to accept his fear and act despite it. Fear for his friends was natural. It meant he truly loved them. Fear of failure showed he understood responsibility. But he couldn't let these fears paralyze him. "Yes," he whispered, feeling something change in his soul. "I am afraid. I'm afraid of letting my friends down, afraid of not meeting their trust. I'm afraid my pride will lead us to trouble. But that's exactly why I cannot give up." The sword in his hands blazed with pure golden light again. The black spots of fear began to melt like frost under spring sun. James felt a surge of strength and determination. "I accept my fear," he said, looking directly into the empty eye sockets of the Dark Knight's helmet. "But I won't let it control me. My friends trust me, and I won't fail them." He burst forward, and now his movements were swift and confident. Each strike of his sword dispelled the darkness around his opponent. The Dark Knight tried to counterattack, but James was no longer the frightened young man who had retreated across the arena. "My fears are part of me," he said, parrying another attack, "but they don't determine my actions. I choose to protect those I love. I choose to be better than my doubts." James's final strike pierced the Dark Knight through, and he crumbled into thousands of dark fragments that vanished in the air. The arena transformed back into the throne room, and Godric Gryffindor stood before him with an approving smile. "Well done, James Potter," he said, approaching the young man and placing a hand on his shoulder. "You understood the most important truth. True courage lies not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to act for others despite your own doubts." The sword in James's hands transformed into a small golden token in the shape of a lion. The token was warm to the touch and occasionally released sparks of real fire. "Take this," Gryffindor said. "This is a sign that you have passed my trial. And remember, a true leader is not one who knows no fear, but one who leads others even when he himself is afraid." He paused, studying James carefully. "Your friends chose you not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to fight for them." Golden light began to envelop James, and he felt the familiar pull of transportation. But before disappearing, he managed to hear the founder's final words. "And one more thing, young man. What you find at the end of this path, use it wisely. Great gifts require great responsibility. The light became blinding, and James felt himself being transported back to the central hall where his worried friends awaited him. "James!" Sirius rushed to him, almost knocking him down. "Merlin, we thought you were gone for a whole hour." "An hour?" James asked in surprise, looking around. Indeed, the silvery light in the hall had grown somewhat dimmer, and new images had appeared on the walls, scenes of his own trial, carved in stone like memories. He could see himself fighting the Dark Knight, and it looked so real, as if someone had filmed the entire battle. "Time flows differently here," Remus explained, carefully examining the golden token in James's hand. "Each trial apparently exists in its own temporal space." Peter was still trembling, his small eyes darting from James to Gryffindor's archway, which once again glowed with calm red-gold radiance. "We heard battle sounds. Metal clashing, someone shouting. What happened there?" James sat on the edge of the pedestal, feeling adrenaline gradually leave his body. His hands still trembled after that emotional battle with his fears, and his mouth still tasted of metal from the tension. "It was difficult," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. "Godric Gryffindor didn't test my physical strength or swordsmanship skills. He tested my ability to look fears in the eye and act despite them." James fell silent, remembering the Dark Night and the visions it brought. Some things were too personal to share even with his best friends. How could he tell them he had seen their deaths? That his greatest fear was that he would fail them due to his own imperfection? "Fear as an opponent," Remus mused thoughtfully. "Very symbolic. Gryffindor always valued courage above all, but true courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about acting despite fear." Sirius sat beside James, his gray eyes sparkling with curiosity and excitement. What did Godric himself look like? Was he like in the portraits? "Bigger," James replied with a slight smile. "Much bigger, and wiser than I expected. He didn't just want me to defeat some enemy. He wanted me to understand something about myself." He looked at the token again, lying in his palm. The small golden lion seemed alive. From time to time it turned its head or flicked its tail, and tiny sparks flew from its eyes. He said that a true leader isn't one who knows no fear, but one who leads others even when he himself is afraid, James added quietly. "And that what we'll find here must be used wisely." His words sounded like a prophecy, and all four friends felt something significant in them. James looked at the book on the pedestal. Now a new entry had appeared on its pages, written in his own handwriting, though he didn't remember writing it. "James Potter, House of Gryffindor, trial passed. Courage in accepting fear." Below it, in Gryffindor's archaic handwriting, was added, "Let the next show wisdom of heart." "Very well," Remus said after a long silence, rising from his place by the pedestal. His pale face looked even paler in the bluish light of the northern archway, and his thin fingers nervously gripped his wand. "I suppose it's my turn." He approached Ravenclaw's archway, and the blue radiance became more intense, pulsing in a rhythm that resembled the beating of a great bird's wings. Unlike the warm, welcoming light of Gryffindor, this light was colder, more detached, but at the same time hypnotically beautiful. "Remus," James began, but his friend raised a hand, stopping him. "No, it's all right. If we want to learn what the Founders hid, all four of us must pass our trials." Remus smiled weakly, though worry could still be read in his eyes. "Besides, I've always loved puzzles. Perhaps Rowena Ravenclaw has prepared something interesting for me." When he extended his hand to the blue radiance, it enveloped his fingers with cool streams of light. A voice filled the hall, melodious as the chime of silver bells, but at the same time haughty and slightly disdainful. "Remus Lupin, student of the House of Gryffindor, but son of Ravenclaw in spirit. You seek knowledge of all kinds, even such as might bring pain. Are you ready to show that the mind can overcome any obstacle? Are you ready to prove that wisdom is more important than strength?" "I am ready," Remus replied, though his friends noticed a slight tremor in his voice. "Then enter, and let your mind show its true sharpness. But remember, not all knowledge is worth acquiring, and not all truths are worth knowing." The blue light absorbed Remus, and he vanished behind the archway. Again an invisible barrier descended behind him, leaving the three friends to wait in the central hall. This time the sounds from the archway were quite different from those during James's trial. Instead of the clashing of swords came the quiet whisper of turning pages, distant voices debating complex philosophical terms, and occasionally, soft humming, as if some strange mechanisms were working. "I hope he manages," Peter whispered nervously, biting his fingernail. "Remus is clever, but he always judges himself so harshly." James nodded, remembering his own trial. If each founder had created a test that touched the deepest weaknesses and strengths of a person, then Remus would face something connected to his constant struggle between human and beast nature, his endless doubts about his own worth. Remus found himself in a circular room whose walls were completely covered with bookshelves. But these were no ordinary shelves. They stretched upward so high they were lost in the bluish shadows of the ceiling, and the books on them glowed with their own inner light. Some volumes were so bright it hurt to look at them, others barely flickered, and still others pulsed as if alive. In the center of the room stood an elegant table of dark wood, on which lay parchment, ink, and a quill pen. Above the table in the air hung a transparent sphere the size of a human head, inside which a miniature universe slowly revolved. Stars, planets, nebulae, all moving in a complex dance. "Knowledge," Remus whispered, turning around and examining the endless rows of books. "This is all the knowledge of the world." From behind one of the shelves emerged a woman of medium height with piercing blue eyes and long chestnut hair, braided in a complex style adorned with small sapphires. She was dressed in a blue robe that shimmered with silver threads, and in her hand held a long wand with a crystal at its tip. "Rowena Ravenclaw," she said, her voice seeming to come from several places at once. "And you, Remus Lupin, seeker of knowledge and wisdom hiding behind the mask of Gryffindor courage." Remus nodded uncertainly. I'm ready for the trial." Ravenclaw smiled, but it was a cold, evaluating smile. "The trial has already begun from the moment you entered here. Tell me, what do you see?" Remus looked around the room again. A library. An enormous library with knowledge of all kinds. "Superficial," Ravenclaw remarked. "Look deeper. Use not only your eyes, but your mind." Remus concentrated, trying to understand what was expected of him. Gradually, he began to notice details he had initially missed. The books on the shelves were arranged not randomly. Their glow created complex patterns that resembled star charts or alchemical formulas. The sphere above the table rotated not chaotically, but in a certain rhythm, synchronized with the pulsation of some volumes. "This isn't just a library," he said slowly. This is a living organism. Knowledge here is interconnected, creating something greater." "Better," Ravenclaw nodded approvingly. "And now tell me, what do you most desire to learn?" Remus hesitated. He had many questions, many things he wished to understand. But one question had pursued him all his life, especially since he had learned to control his beast nature. I want to know how to rid myself of the curse. How to become fully human," he whispered. Ravenclaw nodded, as if she had expected such an answer. "And are you ready to pay any price for this knowledge?" "Yes," Remus replied without hesitation. "Any? Interesting. Then let us begin." She waved her wand, and one of the books flew down from a shelf, landing on the table before Remus. The tome was thick, its cover made of an unfamiliar dark blue material, and the title written in silvery letters: "Curses of the Blood and Paths to Freedom." "The first trial," Ravenclaw said. "Read this book and find the answer to your question. But remember, every page has its price." Remus opened the book, and the first page blazed with bright light. The words on the page moved, interweaving in complex schemes and diagrams. He read about ancient rituals, about blood magic, about ways of transforming human essence. But with each page, he felt something leaving him. At first it was small things, memories of first-year lessons, names of classmates he rarely spoke with. Then larger fragments: how he first met James, first experiments with animagi, shared trips to Hogsmeade. "What's happening?" he asked, looking up from the book. "The price of knowledge," Ravenclaw replied calmly. "To gain the new, one must renounce the old. Your memory of friends is only the first stage. Continue reading, and you will find what you seek." Remus hesitated, but the temptation was too strong. He continued reading, and with each page understanding became clearer. He saw formulas that could free him from the curse forever. But the price was growing. Now memories of Sirius were disappearing, of their nighttime conversations, of how he helped him during transformations, of his support after particularly difficult full moons. Then memories of Peter began to vanish, of his shy smiles, of how he tried to help despite his own fears, of how he never envied their successes but sincerely rejoiced for them. "Stop," whispered Remus's inner voice, but he couldn't. The knowledge was so close, so attainable. Finally he reached the last page. There was described a ritual that could forever free him from lycanthropy. But when he read the final sentence, he felt the most precious thing disappearing from his memory: memories of James. "No," he exclaimed, slamming the book shut. "I can't." Ravenclaw raised an eyebrow. Why? You wanted this knowledge above all else. Because without friends I wouldn't be myself, Remus replied, breathing heavily. This knowledge would give me nothing if I couldn't remember what I live for. Interesting, Ravenclaw murmured, and a note of approval appeared in her voice. First trial passed. You understood that some knowledge costs too much. The book vanished, and memories began returning to Remus in waves. He remembered everything again, both friends and their adventures, and how much they meant to him. But that was only the beginning, Ravenclaw continued. The second trial is more difficult. She waved her wand again, and the room changed. Now they stood in the center of an enormous labyrinth whose walls were made of living books. The volumes moved, rearranged themselves, creating new passages and blocking old ones. This is the labyrinth of knowledge, Ravenclaw explained. At the center lies what you truly seek, not a way to rid yourself of the curse, but something far more important. But to reach the center, you'll have to answer questions that haunt you. What questions? Remus asked. You'll recognize them when you encounter them. Remus began moving through the labyrinth. The passages constantly changed, but he noticed a pattern. If he moved in the direction of the brightest glowing books, he could gradually approach the center. At the first crossroads, his voice stopped him, coming from all sides at once. What makes you human, mind or heart? Remus pondered. This was a complex question that touched the very essence of his inner struggle. I think what makes me human is the combination of mind and heart. Mind allows me to control my beast nature, and heart, to love friends despite everything. The labyrinth walls parted, opening a new path. At the second crossroads came the next question. If you could choose, save the life of a stranger or preserve a secret that protects your friends, what would you choose? This question was even more difficult. Remus imagined a situation where his lycanthropy could threaten someone innocent, but revealing this secret would endanger James, Sirius, and Peter. I would try to find a third path, he said finally. Save the stranger without revealing the secret. And if that's impossible, I would save the stranger. My friends would understand. Again the walls parted. The third question came when he had almost reached the center. What is more frightening, being a monster or being alone? Remus stopped. This question touched his deepest fears. All these years he had feared that his beast nature would make him a monster, but at the same time he was terrified by the thought that friends might leave him. More frightening to be a monster, he said quietly, because a monster harms others. And loneliness only hurts me. The last walls separated, and Remus found himself in a circular room at the labyrinth's center. There were no books here, only a simple mirrored table on which lay one object, a small silver mirror. The final trial, Ravenclaw said, appearing beside him. Look in the mirror and tell me what you see. Remus carefully took the mirror and looked into it. At first he saw only his usual reflection. Pale, weary face marked with thin scars, brown eyes that always seemed older than his age. But then the image began to change. He saw himself during the full moon, but not as a wild beast, but as a person who retained control even in the most terrible moments. He saw himself helping other people with similar curses, becoming a bridge between the human and magical worlds. I see not a monster, he whispered. I see a person who has learned to live with his dark side and use this experience to help others. And what do you feel looking at this? Ravenclaw asked. Peace, Remus replied, surprised by his own answer. For the first time in many years, true peace. I don't need to rid myself of my lycanthropy to become a full person. I already am one. Ravenclaw smiled, this time sincerely and warmly. Third trial passed. You understood the most important wisdom. True knowledge lies not in changing yourself, but in accepting yourself and finding your place in the world. The mirror transformed into a blue token in the shape of an eagle. The bird was carved with such skill it seemed alive. Its eyes sparkled with intelligence, and its wings seemed to tremble with the desire to soar. Take this, Ravenclaw said. This is a sign that you passed my trial. And remember, true wisdom is not in the quantity of knowledge you've acquired, but in which knowledge you use and which you refuse. Blue light began to envelop Remus, but before he disappeared, Ravenclaw added, And one more thing, young man. Your curse is not a weakness. In the future it will become your strength, if you learn to use it wisely. Blue light flared in the central hall, and Remus appeared back by the pedestal. He looked tired, but on his face was an expression of deep peace that his friends had never seen before. Remus! James jumped up to him. How did it go? What was there? Remus sat on the edge of the pedestal, still firmly gripping the blue token. Difficult, he said after a pause. Rowena Ravenclaw created a labyrinth of riddles and trials. She offered me what I had always wanted, a way to rid myself of lycanthropy. Sirius leaned forward. And what? And I refused, Remus replied quietly, because the price would have been forgetting you, friends. And then I realized that I don't need to rid myself of the curse at all. I need to learn to live with it. Peter approached closer. And how do you feel now? Remus smiled, and this was the first genuine smile without a shadow of self-reproach that his friends had seen from him in a long time. Better than ever. For the first time I feel that the curse isn't something to be ashamed of, but part of who I am, and that I can use this experience to help others. James patted his friend on the shoulder. We always knew that, Remus. You just didn't see it yourself. Now a second entry appeared in the book on the pedestal. Remus Lupin, House of Gryffindor, trial passed. Wisdom and self-acceptance. And below it in Ravenclaw's archaic handwriting was added, let the next show the strength of devotion. All four looked at the yellow-black archway of Hufflepuff, and then at Peter, who stood as far from it as possible, pressed against the hall's wall. Peter Pettigrew stood against the wall, as far from Hufflepuff's yellow-black archway as possible, his small eyes wide with fear. His hands trembled, and his breathing had become shallow and uneven. He looked at the archway as if death itself awaited him there. Peter, James said gently, approaching him, everything will be all right. We all passed our trials and returned. But you're strong, Peter whispered, not taking his eyes off the yellow light. And I'm the weakest of us. What if I can't manage? What if Helga Hufflepuff sees that I'm unworthy even of Gryffindor? Sirius approached from the other side. Peter, listen to me. You're not weak. You learned animagus magic along with us. That requires considerable willpower. You've always stayed with us, even when it was frightening. Sirius is right, Remus added, his voice sounding calmer and more confident than usual after his completed trial. Loyalty isn't weakness, Peter. It's one of the rarest and most valuable qualities. Helga Hufflepuff saw this in you before you realized it yourself. Peter nervously licked his lips. But what if she shows me things I don't want to see? Things about myself? Then you'll look at them and come back to us, James said firmly. We'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes. After long hesitation, Peter finally slowly approached the western archway. The yellow-black light became warmer, softer. It enveloped him not as it had absorbed the other friends, but as if embracing him. From the archway came the sense of fresh-baked bread, honey, and wildflowers. The voice that rang out was so maternal and kind that tears came to Peter's eyes. Peter Pettigrew, my little son, student of the House of Gryffindor, but child of Hufflepuff in heart. You think you are weak, but I see your true strength. Are you ready to show that the greatest strength lies not in magic or courage, but in devotion? Are you ready to prove that even the smallest can be the strongest? Peter swallowed, trying to overcome the lump in his throat. I am ready, he whispered. Then enter, my child, and let your heart show all its beauty. The yellow light carefully, almost tenderly absorbed Peter, and he vanished behind the archway. The sounds coming from there were the quietest of all. Barely audible voices speaking softly and soothingly, distant music resembling a lullaby, and occasionally quiet crying that changed to comforting words. Peter found himself in a clearing in the middle of a blooming garden. Around him grew the most diverse plants, from simple wildflowers to exotic magical plants that glowed softly in the twilight. The air was warm and smelled of honey, vanilla, and fresh earth after rain. In the center of the clearing stood a cozy cottage of yellow brick, with round windows and straw on the roof. A thin stream of smoke rose from the chimney, and warm yellow light glowed in the windows. It was the coziest place Peter had ever seen. From the cottage emerged a woman, not tall, plump, with a kind round face and chestnut hair braided in a thick plait. She was dressed in a simple yellow dress with black trim, and in her hands carried a basket of fresh-baked rolls. Welcome, Peter, she said in a warm voice. I am Helga Hufflepuff, and I have been waiting for you so long. Peter nervously scratched the back of his head. You were waiting for me? But why? I'm not special. Helga smiled so warmly that Peter felt something melt in his chest. Oh, son, you are very mistaken. Come, sit with me, and I'll show you something. She led him to a small table under a spreading apple tree, on which already stood cups of hot chocolate and a plate of biscuits. Peter sat down, still not understanding what was happening. Tell me, Peter, Helga began, pouring chocolate. What do you think about yourself? Peter's shoulders slumped. I'm weak, cowardly. Not as clever as Remus, not as brave as James, not as charismatic as Sirius. I just dragged them down. Interesting, Helga murmured. And now look over there. She pointed to the air by the tree, and there appeared an image, like the reflection of a memory. Peter saw himself, younger, a frightened first year crying in an empty room after older Slytherins had bullied him. I remember this, he said quietly. It was in the second semester of first year. Look further, Helga gently requested. The image changed. Now he saw James, Sirius, and Remus finding him in that room. Instead of simply comforting him, they sat around him and waited until he told them what had happened himself. And then, without asking permission, they went and spoke with those Slytherins, not threatening, not fighting, but simply making them understand that Peter was under their protection. They did this for me, Peter whispered. Yes. And now look at this. A new image showed a scene from third year. James lay in the hospital wing after a failed transfiguration experiment, and Madame Pomfrey had strictly forbidden visits. But Peter, using his small stature and unremarkable appearance, had snuck into the hospital wing through the kitchens and spent the whole night by his friend's bedside, reading him lesson notes. I just wanted to help, Peter said. Exactly, Helga nodded. And this? Now he saw himself during fourth year, when Remus was particularly depressed after a difficult transformation. Sirius and James tried to cheer him up with jokes and pranks, but it wasn't working. Then Peter simply sat nearby and began telling funny stories about his numerous relatives, asking nothing in return, just trying to distract his friend from pain. You always knew exactly what each of us needed, Helga said. James needed someone who would value him not for his achievements, but simply for who he is. Sirius needed someone who wouldn't expect constant rebellion from him and would allow him to sometimes be vulnerable. Remus needed someone who would accept him without any conditions. The images changed one after another, showing dozens of small moments when Peter did something for his friends. How he remembered all their favorite foods and asked the house elves to prepare something special when one of them was sad. How he was always ready to listen, even when he felt bad himself. How he never envied their successes, but sincerely rejoiced for them. Do you see? Helga asked gently. You think you're weak, but actually you're the strongest of them in the most important thing, in the ability to love unconditionally. Peter wiped his eyes with his sleeve. But I'm a coward. I always get scared first. Helga smiled. And now look at this. The image showed a scene from last year, when a group of seventh-year Slytherins attacked a younger Gryffindor. James and Sirius were at Quidditch, Remus in the hospital wing. Only Peter was nearby. And despite his fear, despite trembling with terror, he stood between the older students and the child. His spells were weak, his defense ineffective, but he didn't back down. And his courage impressed the attackers so much that they left. Do you remember this? Helga asked. Yes, Peter whispered. But I was afraid. Of course you were afraid. And that's exactly what makes your action heroic. Courage isn't the absence of fear, son. Courage is acting rightly despite fear. She stood up and approached him, placing a soft hand on his shoulder. Now tell me, if you had to choose between your own safety and your friend's safety, what would you choose? Friends, Peter replied without hesitation. Always friends. Even if it cost you your life? Peter hesitated only for a moment. Yes, my life isn't worth as much as theirs. Oh, son, Helga said, and there was sadness in her voice. Your life is worth just as much as theirs. But the fact that you're ready to give it, that is true devotion. She stepped back a few paces. And now the final trial. I'll show you the future. Not what will necessarily happen, but what might happen. And you must choose. The air around them became thicker, and new images appeared. Peter saw himself a few years older, tired, frightened. He stood in a dark alley speaking with a figure in a black cloak. The words were unclear, but the emotions were understandable. Fear, despair, a sense of hopelessness. This might happen, Helga said quietly. If dark times come, and they will come, you'll be faced with a difficult choice. And fear might overcome your devotion. No, Peter protested, looking at the image with horror. I would never. Don't swear, son. Fear is a powerful force. But I'll give you something that will help you remember who you truly are. The image changed. Now he saw himself protecting his friends from unknown danger. He was frightened, trembling, but stood firm. And in his eyes burned something new. Not only devotion, but strength given by awareness of his own worth. Remember this, Helga said. Remember that you're not just a shadow of your friends. You are Peter Pettigrew, and in your heart lives love stronger than any fear. All the images disappeared, and they were alone again in the garden. Helga approached him and embraced him, firmly, warmly, as a mother embraces a child after a difficult day. "You passed the trial, son," she whispered. "You proved that your heart truly belongs to Hufflepuff. Devotion, honesty, justice, all this lives in you." She released him and held out something, a yellow token in the shape of a badger. The animal on the token looked determined and protective, ready to defend its burrow from any danger. "Take this," Helga said, "and remember, true strength isn't in being the strongest or cleverest. True strength is in loving others more than yourself." Yellow light began to envelop Peter, but he managed to hear the final words. "And if fear ever overwhelms you, remember this moment. Remember that you're worthy of your friend's love not because you're perfect, but because you're sincere." Yellow light flared in the central hall, and Peter returned to his friends. He looked different, not physically, but there was new confidence in his posture, and in his eyes burned a quiet flame of self-respect that had never been there before. "Peter," James rushed to him. "How did it go? You were there for a long time." Peter looked at the yellow token in his hand, then at his friends. A smile bloomed on his face, not shy as usual, but sincere and warm. "Helga Hufflepuff showed me what I had never seen in myself," he said, his voice sounding firmer than usual. "She showed me all the moments when I helped you, lads, and I didn't even realize I was doing something important." Remus placed a hand on his shoulder. "What else?" "She said I'm not just your shadow," Peter continued, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "That I have my own worth. That devotion isn't weakness, but the rarest strength." Sirius smiled. "We always knew that, Peter." "Maybe," Peter nodded, "but I didn't know it. And now I do." He paused, looking at the token. "She also showed me a possible future, a dark future where I might let you down. But she gave me something to help me remember who I really am. Whatever happens in the future," James said firmly, "we'll always be friends. Always." Peter nodded, gripping the token tightly. "I know, and I'll never forget that." A third entry appeared in the book on the pedestal. "Peter Pettigrew, House of Gryffindor, trial passed. Strength of devotion and self-respect." And below it in Hufflepuff's maternal handwriting was added, "Let the last find courage to accept his shadow." All four slowly turned to the southern archway, where greenish smoke pulsed in a rhythm resembling the hissing of an enormous serpent. Sirius stood before it, his gray eyes full of determination mixed with fear. "Well then," he said, straightening his shoulders, "I suppose it's time to meet the family demons." Sirius Black stood before the green archway of Slytherin, his hands clenched into fists and his jaw tense. The greenish smoke seeping from the archway seemed alive. It coiled around his legs as if trying to drag him inside. Unlike the warm light of the other archways, this radiance was cold, calculating, but at the same time hypnotically attractive. "Sirius," James said, approaching him, "are you sure you're ready?" Sirius nodded curtly, not taking his eyes off the archway. "Yes. I've spent my whole life running from my Slytherin heritage. I suppose it's time to finally face it." Remus and Peter moved closer, creating a circle of support around their friend. "Remember," Remus said quietly, "whatever's in there, you're not alone. We're here, and we'll wait. And whatever Slytherin shows you," Peter added with new confidence in his voice, "it won't change who you really are. You're our friend, regardless of your bloodline." Sirius took a deep breath and stepped toward the archway. The green light became more intense, and the air carried a barely perceptible scent of old parchments and something metallic, perhaps blood or silver. When he touched the green radiance, it enveloped his arm with cold streams. A voice echoed through the hall, not evil as Sirius had expected, but cold, calculating, and extraordinarily penetrating. Sirius Black, descendant of a noble house who renounced his name for an illusion of freedom. "You think you escaped your destiny, but blood doesn't lie, and heritage doesn't disappear. Are you ready to peer into the darkest corners of your soul? Are you ready to accept what is part of you, regardless of whether you like it?" Sirius felt his mouth go dry, but his voice rang out resolutely. "I am ready." "Then enter, and let your true nature show itself. But remember, cunning can serve both good and evil. The choice is always yours." The green light absorbed Sirius, and he vanished behind the archway. The sounds coming from there were the most mysterious of all. Whispers of voices speaking in languages the friends didn't understand, distant hissing that could belong to either serpents or ancient spells, and occasionally, sounds resembling arguments or negotiations. Sirius found himself in a long gallery whose walls were hung with portraits. But these were no ordinary portraits. The people depicted in them moved and spoke, but their faces constantly changed, showing different emotions and even different personalities. The floor was made of black marble with green veins that created patterns resembling serpents or ancient runes. A figure walked slowly through the gallery, a tall man in a dark green robe, with long black hair and penetrating green eyes. His face was aristocratically handsome, but cold and calculating. When he smiled, the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome home, Sirius," the man said in a voice that resembled the rustle of dry leaves. "I am Salazar Slytherin, and you stand in the gallery of your ancestors." Sirius looked around at the portraits and recognized some faces with horror. Here were generations of Blacks, his great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers, all with the same aristocratic arrogance and coldness in their eyes. "This isn't my home," Sirius said tensely. "I renounced all of this." Slytherin laughed. The sound was not malicious, but somewhat disdainful. "You can renounce a house, but you cannot renounce the blood that flows in your veins. Look at yourself, Sirius. Do you really think you're so different from us?" One of the gallery walls transformed into a large mirror, and Sirius saw his reflection. But the mirror showed not only his appearance, it showed his thoughts and actions. He saw himself planning pranks at Hogwarts, but planning not just for fun, but with cold calculation to achieve maximum effect. He saw how he used his knowledge of human psychology to manipulate classmates. He saw moments when his pride overcame compassion. "Do you see?" Slytherin said quietly. "Cunning calculation, the ability to manipulate people to achieve your goals. All this is in you, and you use it. But I use it to protect friends." Sirius protested. "To fight injustice." "Of course," Slytherin nodded. "And that makes you better than your ancestors. But it doesn't make you less Slytherin." He approached closer. "Tell me, why did you really run from home? Because of principles or because of pride?" Sirius hesitated. I couldn't live by their rules." "But why exactly?" "Because the rules were wrong, or because no one had the right to tell you what to do." The question was painful because it touched a truth Sirius tried not to acknowledge, even to himself. Yes, he hated his family's pure-blood prejudices. But wasn't his rebellion dictated primarily by a desire for freedom and unwillingness to submit to anyone? "Both reasons," he finally said honestly. "Good," Slytherin nodded approvingly. "Honesty is the first step toward wisdom. And now look at this." The mirror changed its image. Now it showed various scenes from the future, a possible future. Sirius saw himself becoming an Auror and using Slytherin methods to catch dark wizards. He saw himself protecting the innocent by employing the same cunning he had been taught in childhood. "Your Slytherin traits aren't a curse, Sirius," Slytherin said. "They are tools. The question is only how you use them." "But family, they all became dark wizards," Sirius whispered. "Not all," Slytherin objected, his voice becoming softer. "Look." The portraits on the walls began to change. Now they showed not only dark wizards from the Black family, but also those who fought against darkness. Sirius saw ancestors who sacrificed themselves to protect the weak, who used their cunning to fight tyranny. "Andromeda Black, your cousin," Slytherin said, pointing to one of the portraits. "She too left the family for love. Regulus Black, your younger brother, he will yet make a choice that will surprise many." "Regulus?" Sirius was surprised. "But he follows family traditions." "For now. But he's more like you than you think. Just his path to truth will be different." Slytherin raised his hand, and the gallery changed. Now they stood in a circular room with a high ceiling, in the center of which was an ancient altar with two chalices. One was made of silver and glowed with cold light, the other of gold and radiated warm radiance. "The final trial," Slytherin said. "Before you are two chalices. In the silver one, a potion that will give you power over other people. You'll be able to make them do what you want, but only for what you consider right. In the golden one, a potion that will make you completely altruistic, rid you of all selfish desires, but along with them you'll lose your personality as well." Sirius approached the altar and examined both chalices. "What if I don't drink either?" Slytherin smiled, and this time the smile was genuine. "That's also a choice, perhaps even the wisest one." "I don't want power over people," Sirius said, pushing away from the silver chalice. "But I also don't want to lose myself for others." He looked at Slytherin. "I want to remain myself, with all my flaws and virtues. I want to use my Slytherin traits to protect those I love, but not forget about my own needs." "Wise," Slytherin nodded. You understood what many of your ancestors couldn't understand. True strength isn't in suppressing your nature, and it isn't in giving it free rein. True strength is in balance. Both chalices disappeared, and instead on the altar appeared a green token in the shape of a serpent. The serpent was carved so masterfully it seemed alive. Its eyes sparkled with intelligence, and its pose was simultaneously graceful and ready for defense. "Take this," Slytherin said, "and remember, ambitions can lead to both greatness and downfall. Cunning can serve both good and evil. Your choice determines who you become." Sirius took the token, feeling its cool surface. "What about my family? What about the dark legacy of the Blacks?" Slytherin placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not responsible for your ancestors' sins, Sirius, but you are responsible for your own choices. Use what they taught you, but direct it toward light purposes." Green light began to envelop Sirius, but he managed to hear the final words. "And remember, the most dangerous enemies often come from where you least expect them. Your cunning will help you unravel their plans, but only if you don't let pride blind you." Green light flared in the central hall, and Sirius returned to his friends. He looked different, not physically, but something in his eyes had become deeper, wiser. In his hand was the green token, and on his face, the expression of a person who had finally understood something important about himself. "Sirius," James rushed to him. "How did it go? What was there?" Sirius slowly sat on the edge of the pedestal, still examining the green token. "Salazar Slytherin, he wasn't what I thought. He was complex. He showed me that I really do have Slytherin traits, cunning, ambitions, readiness to manipulate people. But he also showed that these traits can serve good. He looked at his friends. He showed me the history of my family. The real history, not just the dark pages. It turns out many Blacks fought against darkness, using the same methods as dark wizards, but for light purposes." "And how do you feel now?" Remus asked. "Freer," Sirius replied with a smile. "I'm no longer afraid of my Slytherin nature. I've learned to accept it as part of myself, without letting it control me. Cunning can protect the innocent, and ambitions can strive for justice." Peter nodded. "It's like what Helga Hufflepuff told me, that our flaws can become strength if we learn to use them correctly." "Exactly," Sirius agreed. "Slytherin also warned me. He said that the most dangerous enemies often come from where you least expect them." "What could that mean?" James asked thoughtfully. Sirius shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in the future." A fourth entry appeared in the book on the pedestal. "Sirius Black, House of Gryffindor, trial passed. Cunning in service of good." And below it in Slytherin's archaic handwriting was added, "When four become one, the path to truth will open." Now all four tokens lay on the pedestal beside the book, and it began to glow even brighter. Pages turned by themselves until they stopped at a new chapter. Text appeared right before their eyes, written in the handwriting of all four founders simultaneously. "When four pass the trials of the four paths, when they show that unity can hold Gryffindor's courage, Ravenclaw's wisdom, Hufflepuff's devotion, and Slytherin's cunning, then the path will open to what we hid from the world. Take the tokens and go together, where all paths become one." In the center of the hall, where there had been nothing before, a new archway began to appear. Not red, not blue, not yellow, and not green, but iridescent, containing all colors simultaneously. It pulsed with warm, welcoming light, and from it came a sense of something very important, very ancient. "The final trial," James whispered. "For all of us together." "Or a reward," Remus added thoughtfully. "Perhaps the real trial is already behind us, and now we await what the founders wanted to pass to future generations." The four friends took their tokens and, holding hands as they had at the very beginning of their adventure, approached the fifth archway. When they stepped together into the iridescent light, each felt his token grow warmer in his hand, and the archway's light responded to their unity. Ahead awaited the final secret of Hogwarts' founders. The iridescent light of the fifth archway absorbed all four Marauders simultaneously, and they found themselves in the most amazing place any of them had ever seen. It was an enormous circular hall with a dome-like ceiling that seemed made of living sky. Clouds moved there, stars shone, and from time to time northern lights of all possible colors flickered. In the center of the hall stood a round table at which sat four figures the boys immediately recognized: Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Helga Hufflepuff, and Salazar Slytherin. But now they looked not as separate entities, but as parts of a whole, their outlines slightly translucent, and the light around each mingled with the radiance of the others. "Welcome," all four founders said simultaneously, their voices creating a strange harmony. "Welcome to the heart of Hogwarts." James stepped forward, still holding his friend's hands. "We passed all the trials. What did you want to show us?" Gryffindor smiled. "Patience, young man. First tell us, what did you understand from your trials?" "That each of us is stronger than we thought," James replied, "and that our flaws can become strengths. That knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous," Remus added, "and that true wisdom lies in knowing when to refuse knowledge for more important things." "That devotion isn't weakness," Peter said, his voice sounding firmer than ever before, "and that even the least noticeable person can have great value." "And I understood that I shouldn't run from my nature," Sirius concluded. "I should learn to use it for the right purposes." Ravenclaw nodded with approval. "Excellent. Now you are ready to receive the reward for your completed trials." Hufflepuff rose from the table and approached them. "My children, what you are about to see was created in the last days of our alliance, before our paths diverged." For different objects appeared in the air above the table, each glowing with its own color. Gryffindor's golden sword, Ravenclaw's silver diadem adorned with sapphires, Hufflepuff's copper cup, and Slytherin's golden locket with a green emerald. "We offer you a choice," Slytherin said solemnly. "Each of these objects contains part of our power and wisdom. The sword grants courage in the darkest hours. The diadem, wisdom for solving any riddles. The cup, the ability to heal hearts and bodies. The locket, the power of persuasion and influence over others." The four friends exchanged glances. Each of the objects was incredibly valuable and powerful. "But there is another choice," Ravenclaw added, waving her hand. All four artifacts disappeared, and instead something much simpler appeared on the table, an ordinary parchment scroll tied with a black ribbon. "This is a complete map of Hogwarts Castle," Hufflepuff explained. "Every corridor, every room, every secret passage that has ever existed within these walls. It shows not only buildings, but also people who are in the castle." "A living map?" Remus was amazed. "That's impossible. Such magic is too complex." Slytherin smiled. "For someone alone, yes. But we created it together, combining our 4 different approaches to magic. Godric put strength into it, I, cunning Rowena, mind, and Helga, heart. Why do you offer us a choice between powerful artifacts and just a map?" James asked. Gryffindor leaned forward. "Because true power isn't in magical objects, but in how you use them. Powerful artifacts attract attention, create envy, can corrupt those who possess them. And the map," Ravenclaw continued, "is a tool for those who value knowledge and freedom more than power. It will help you protect others, solve mysteries, find those who are lost." "But the choice is yours," Hufflepuff said gently. "What do you truly need?" The Marauders exchanged glances again. The conversation took place without words. They had long learned to understand each other with half a look. "The map," James said without hesitation. "We'll take the map." "Why?" Slytherin asked, though approval could be read in his eyes. "Because we don't need powerful artifacts," Sirius replied. "We're strong together. And the map will help us protect other students, find those in trouble. And explore the castle," Remus added with a sly smile. "We are Marauders, after all." All 4 founders laughed. For the first time in their entire meeting, the sound was genuinely cheerful. "Perfect answer," Hufflepuff said, extending the scroll toward James. "Take it, and remember, this map isn't simple. It will respond only to those who use it with pure intentions." James took the scroll, and it became warm in his hands. "How does it work?" Ravenclaw touched the parchment with her fingertip. "It will learn to recognize you. Give it names, not real ones, but such as you want to be remembered by. And then it will be yours forever." "Names?" Sirius pondered. "We're Marauders. Maybe something connected to our animagus forms?" "Prongs," James said, thinking of his stag form. "I'll be Prongs." "Padfoot," Sirius added, smiling. "Like my dog appearance." "Moony," Remus said quietly. "For obvious reasons." "And I?" Peter hesitated, then said resolutely. "Wormtail." "I'll be Wormtail." The map in James's hands flared with soft light, and words appeared on the parchment. Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs are proud to present the Marauders' map. "It accepted us," Peter whispered in awe. "And now," Hufflepuff said, "our blessings." All 4 founders rose and approached the Marauders. In turn, each touched their foreheads, leaving barely visible light. "Our strength is with you," Gryffindor said to James. "May your courage inspire others in dark times." "Our wisdom is with you," Ravenclaw whispered to Remus. May your mind find a way out of the most difficult situations. Our love is with you, Hufflepuff said to Peter. May your devotion be a light for those who have lost hope. Our cunning is with you, Slytherin concluded, touching Sirius's forehead. May your cleverness help unravel enemies' plans. Then all four spoke in chorus. Go and remember, true magic isn't in spells and potions, but in the bonds between hearts. And whatever happens in the future, your friendship is the strongest magic of all. But Slytherin took another step forward, his green eyes sad. And one final warning for all of you together. Dark times will come when fear will try to divide even the closest people. When those days come, remember what you learned here. Trust each other, even when it seems dangerous to trust. For the most terrible betrayal often comes from where it's least expected. His words sounded like a prophecy, and all four friends felt a chill in their chests. The hall began to dissolve around them, and the last thing they saw were the founders' smiles and their hands waving goodbye. The Marauders found themselves back in the labyrinth's central hall. But now it looked different. The founders' archways had dimmed, and an atmosphere of completion hung in the air. James still held the map, which pulsed warmly in his hands. Did this really happen? Peter whispered, looking at the token in his palm. Yes, Remus replied, his voice filled with awe. We received Hogwarts' greatest treasure. Sirius looked around the hall. And now what? How do we get back? His question was answered almost immediately. A new passage appeared in the wall, leading upward. Light from lanterns and distant voices came from it. Boys, came Professor McGonagall's familiar voice. Boys, where are you? The four friends exchanged glances. James carefully hid the map under his robes, and the tokens disappeared into their pockets. Well then, he said with a smile, ready to explain? We always are, Sirius replied, but there was none of his usual carelessness in his voice. What they had experienced had changed them all. As they climbed the stairs back to the familiar world of the castle, James felt the map pulsing warmly under his robes. They had received not just a magical artifact, they had received the key to all of Hogwarts' secrets, a tool that would help them protect others and explore the world. In their pockets lay the founders' tokens, and with them, the blessing of the castle's very creators. Ahead lay their final years at Hogwarts, full of adventures and discoveries with their new map. As they climbed the stairs, none of them could predict how important this map would become in future dark times, how many students they would save thanks to it, how many secrets they would solve. But the founders knew, and that's why they waited 1,000 years to pass their gift to these four boys, those who would create the legendary Marauders map. The labyrinth beneath the castle closed behind them, but not forever. Somewhere in the depths of Hogwarts it awaited the next worthy ones, the next four friends who could prove that true magic lives not in spells, but in human hearts.